Excellent. All right, Christina, I'll turn it back to you to open it up and then I'll take over on the discussion side.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this very rainy evening. So tonight we are hoping to get closer to a recommendation from you all. And that recommendation really is focused on answering two questions. The first one is, should we go out for a levy lid lift? And the second one is, if yes, then what should the rate be? Just as a reminder, we've said this a couple of times, but to say it in a more pointed way, the discussion even about the rate, it really doesn't have to be about a number. You know, getting feedback from you all on what the considerations that council should take about the rate is really helpful. I think if any of you end up watching council and the discussion that they have, you'll hear that they are going to be just as have just as many questions and opinions as you all do. So this is a tough conversation, and we're just really interested in hearing from all of you on those kind of concepts that we should be considering. So the process for tonight is, just like Allegra said, there's not going to be any PowerPoint from staff. Thank you. We've done enough of that. But you know, it's really, Allegra's going to do a little bit of a summary of the survey results. Thank you all for participating with that. That really helped get kind of a straw poll of where people are feeling like they're at. And then to really facilitate a discussion between you all, you know, where are you having questions? Where are, you know, for those of you who have different opinions, to be able to share that, and different considerations to share that with each other, again, so we can hopefully get to a recommendation. Staff is here for you for questions, but really this is really about your discussion and your recommendation. So just to also start a little bit with the end in mind, the next steps will really be, Allegra will be drafting a report that really captures your discussion and what your recommendation comes to this evening, and then drafting that and sending it out to all of you via email. And we hope that you'll take a look at that and send your comments back to us by email, so that at our next meeting, which is on May 19th, apologies for sending it out on the 21st. We're not asking for a Saturday meeting, another Thursday night meeting. So for meeting number 6 on May 19th, getting together and having one last time to review that and provide feedback before that ends up going to council. And next time, you know, Sarah or myself will share a little bit more about what the council process will look like. So that is what we're here for tonight. So Allegra, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, so what I thought I'd do is kind of work through take the kind of the buckets of the questions that you responded to on the survey. I had an opportunity to kind of look and see, like, where is the group, and then where do I think there's some outstanding questions, and I may ask for some discussion there. And I think some of you still had some questions of staff. So as Christina mentioned, I may, you know, turn it back to Sarah or Christy or Christina to clarify on some things. There was a pretty extensive Q&A that we've been compiling all along. Some of you have had, you know, very specific questions, and I think staff's been super responsive there. We'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end if there was anything anyone wanted to ask about there. But I would also say, if there are questions that you weren't really tracking or following in the Q&A, that's okay too. I think, you know, some people really dug very, very far into the details. That was based on interest or background, and that's fine. And you can still answer a lot of these questions without some of that detail. So it's not necessary that you come into this feeling like you can recite chapter and verse the Q&A document there. So I want to start with just, you know, the first question that was asked was, like, should the city council place a measure on the ballot for a levy lid lift? You know, 9 people said yes, we should, and nobody said we shouldn't do it. And then there were 3 that were still in the I don't know phase. And so that's where I thought we could have a little bit of discussion there. I think the sort of other concerns that were shared, just to kind of frame, like, what are the overarching concerns we heard. One is there's interest from at least, you know, 3 to 4 committee members on maybe discussing trying to use undesignated fund balance to balance the budget over the term of the levy. And actually there is some flexibility that the council has to do that. So we can talk a little bit about that. And then there was just, I think, general concern, and we heard this already around, well, is there already too much of, is this going to be too high a tax burden given the economic conditions? And the fact that we've had in 2022 a school levy and a parks bond pass. And so, people have been saying yes to things. Is there some point at which people say no? And then there's also just sort of the ability to pay conversation that we heard before. And so these are all concepts that I think we can bring into the rate, is to say, that I think a lot of you were like, some people were like, I don't know what the right rate is. We had a range from like 1.2 to 1.52. But a lot of other people just said, gosh, it's a hard question because, we need the services, and I appreciate that for some people it can be tough to pay. So I wanted to see if there was anyone on the sort of don't know side or kind of undecided that wanted to kind of share an opinion or get thoughts or ask a question of staff that might move them to kind of over to yes, or what else did you want to know?
Allegra, can you hear me? It's Jim McCurdy.
Yes, I can. Yeah, please
Okay.
Go ahead, Jim.
So I was one of the I don't knows. I found, as I wrote, some sort of contradictory, what I heard were contradictory comments, and maybe others heard something different. But it sounded to me like my kid asking for a buck because she was short to buy a hamburger, and I give her the buck, and all of a sudden she's also buying ice cream. That it sounded early on like we have this gap and we have this graph, and the gap gets bigger and bigger, and we have the shortfall, and by using a levy lift, we'll fill the gap. Oh, but also, by the way, if we get the money, we have these other 12 positions we want to fill. Those are two different questions, I thought, in my mind, and that's why I came away somewhat concerned. So with that sort of comment, I wonder if Sarah or Christina, if people could tackle that and help me understand what happens if you get the money. Do we just plug a gap? Is it in fact adding the services? Help me understand that dynamic.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And I think that I would say when we get to that kind of, should we maintain or should we expand? I think there was some confusion that like you're expressing around what does it mean to maintain? Because I hear maintain and then I hear we can add staff.
Right.
So, yeah. So I don't know, Sarah, Christina, which of you wants to?
Sarah, I can let you.
Want me to take a stab at it?
And then I can fill in or say
Yes.
differently after you.
That sounds good. So I'll take first stab. So
great.
I think and it is confusing because what we have is there is the chart, the initial forecast that you saw is for costs as currently budgeted. And yet what we recognize is that staff are getting behind because workload and demand has increased, and we haven't increased our staff to keep up with that, but the expectations have increased, right? There's more of everything happening. So as we look to try and say, well, what would it take to actually meet our current workload demands for services? That was where the adds to maintain. And I realize that is contradictory. But the recognition is that if we stay at our current staffing levels, that we'll need to reduce levels of service. I mean, they're actually already effectively being reduced because we're not able to keep up. Or in the case of support services, where we are burning out people, they're, working far more than what they should, or their backlog is significant. And in some cases that can impact the efficiency of the rest of the organization. If our IT resources aren't fully staffed and their backlog is, they're not able to get to systems projects, not able to get to network things, that poses some significant issues. So you can operate in that for a while, but not sustainable. So that was what that maintain service level. We also recognize that if we can't afford to add up to that level, then we just need to adjust our service level expectations. So it's, we were trying to do our best best estimate for what it would cost to staff at a level to maintain our service levels above the costs that we currently have. So that tries to explain that. Then there were some more additions that were clearly, we've heard from the community that we would like more of these things. We would like to do policing differently. We would like to have more human services support, for our community. We'd like more adult recreation activities. So we've heard that these are truly above and beyond everything we're doing. We would like more of these things. And so that was the, enhanced service levels that we were asking about. And of course, there's probably way more enhancements, but those were the ones that we clearly have heard, both from the community and that align with council's interests. So does that help at all, Jim?
That helps. Now, let me ask a related question. That's probably beyond the purview of this committee, because we're all volunteers with other things going on in our lives, pick apart the city's budget line by line. But I will ask a general question, and that is, have there been metrics used to look at the various programs the city operates to determine what's worth keeping and enhancing and what's worth not keeping? And I say that there are programs that you folks do that sound great, but if you're spending a lot of money and serving 7 people, probably not effective. So,
Right.
I mean, talk to me how your decision making in terms of the metrics you use to determine where you're going to use the resources.
Well, I would say that we do have performance measures that we use, and that those are collected annually and published in our budget. In addition to that, departments have metrics that they monitor. We also have both our public works department and our parks and recreation functions are accredited, which means that they follow national standards, and they have went through a review process to make sure that they are following best practices for exactly that, to ensure that we're operating as efficiently as possible and offering services that meet, generally accepted standards, so that we're not gold plating and we're, being as effective and efficient as possible. I also think I mentioned one time that just in general, our city has created, I wanted to say enforced, but that's not the right word. They've created a culture of continuous improvement. And so I would say every single staff person has been empowered to identify areas where they could see things being done better, and having the ability where they can to make those changes and to bring them up so that they can be, applied. So I think those together really do help us to ensure that we're offering effective services, not just a lot of services. Christina, do you want to add anything to that?
The only other thing I would say is, I think what we could have done better through this process that's really fast and dirty is describing more that what will likely happen is there's a menu approach where not all of those maintained services would be recommended. Not all of the emerging issues would be recommended, but there's some council goals, like Sarah said, that probably the alternative policing, for example, is going to be something that council, if we don't recommend it as staff, if you don't recommend it as a council, as a committee, council will probably still want to see that on the levy lift based on their council goals currently. But whether or not we add another HR person or another GIS technician, I think those are some of the discussions that we do need to have, because we're not going to be able to do everything. I don't think any of the staff would recommend that we put a package together that includes everything that we've offered to you all as possibilities. That's just not a fiscally responsible decision at this point.
Thank you.
Thanks. One other question I wanted to just raise, because I saw it in the sort of notes on the, not certain where we are, was again, just that response to, is this the right time, given inflation, price of things, and recent levies? And is there flexibility on the timing? And I think there's really not, but I wanted to, that clearly wasn't maybe clear. And so I wanted to see if we could clarify, is there any flexibility on the timing, or is it kind of, this is the moment?
You know, this is sort of interesting because the fact that the economy is challenging, in my mind, is the main reason why we really don't have the flexibility to wait. You know, currently the model shows that we would be okay for, you know, a year, maybe a little longer than a year. But given, you know, as we've mentioned several times, we updated the forecast we're using right now primarily is from last November. And as we go to update that forecast, I'm concerned that that gap is going to move forward. And so I think pushing this out is not, there really isn't an option to hold off on the vote. You know, if we had 3 years where there was no gap, then I think we could probably say, you know, things look pretty good. We could take this to voters later, but I think that that now is the time.
And great comment, Robin. I'll go to you next, from Lincoln, just saying, you know, in his government budget development experience, you want to be anticipating and raising the revenues before those higher expenses are incurred, because it is very difficult to backfill once you've committed to expend. So thanks for that comment. I'm going to go to Robin next and then over to Lisa. Yep, go ahead, Robin. Just take.
I thought Lincoln had a question. Was he ahead of me? Oh
no, I read his comment from the chat.
Oh, this is about perception, and I think that it's, whoops.
Oh, uh-oh. I think we may have lost Robin. So I'm going to go to Lisa, to you, and then we'll get Robin when she's back.
Thank you. So I was wondering, I was paying attention to the updated Q&A that was sent out. And I know there was one just sent out shortly before our meeting. But could you review the answers to the questions that appear on page 27? Because just like within a day ago, I printed the entire document and the answers weren't there to that list of questions. They should be fairly short, I think.
Sure, let me just.
Responses, but because I'm not sure if I haven't seen them, I was paying attention to this stuff. I don't know if everybody else has seen them either.
Okay, it's actually kind of lengthy.
Yeah, those aren't short. Yeah, those aren't short answers, actually.
But the document I printed just a day ago, day and a half ago, didn't have answers to questions 2 through 9.
Yeah, so we sent out a new updated one that has answers to all of those.
And was that just sent like within the hour?
Nope.
No, it was sent on Wednesday at 9:25 a.m. I can hit forward on that now, Lisa.
Okay, well, I think you were answering part of one of the questions was about the use of the undesignated general fund dollars. And I had a question because, and you responded to that. I saw the response that it wasn't a typo, that there was going to be a projection of $17 million available at the end of a time period. So I'm trying to understand how the decision-making happens in terms of all of the money that's still on the table at the end of a fiscal year, and then the choices that are made for its use. I mean, you sent a list of what the choices have been.
Sarah, do you want to go through the process that staff and the city manager take to make recommendations about undesignated fund balance in the budget process and council's decision?
And can you clarify, I mean, you were actually saying that there's going to be $17 million left still at the end of the fiscal year?
Let me clarify that. That breaks into 2 pieces. So the city does maintain what we call revenue stabilization fund. And that stabilization fund is our revenue safety net. So if there should be an unanticipated recession that happens and our sales taxes tank, that's what that fund is intended for, is to use in the event that there is an unanticipated where we don't have time to respond to it. The rest of the reserves, so those are in what we call revenue stabilization fund. They are considered reserves. So when we go out to our bond rating agencies, they count that as part of our reserves. We do not consider that as money that we can use for one-time uses. That money is considered to be saved for a rainy day that you can't plan for. So the rest of the revenue stable, or the rest of the fund balance, that is anticipated to be undesignated funds that would be available at the end of the biennium. The reality is that amount might be higher, might be lower, but based upon our forecast and our budget, that was the anticipated amount. What will happen during the budget process after we update the forecast and we have a better sense of what people's year-end projections are for spending, what the year-end projections are for revenue, we'll update that amount. Departments will have been preparing their budget requests that would include all of, going back to the plans that we have, the council work plan, the city's master plans. They will be preparing requests for those that work. And that is where they might be requesting the use of those reserves to help fund those projects. So number one, we've gotten during our council retreat each year, council gives us guidance on what their priorities are. Staff then prepare the work plan and the request to fund those priorities. Then we look and we say, well, what do we have potentially money to fund? We go through a process of prioritizing that within the city managers and leadership teams. So we frequently don't have enough money to fund everything that comes through. So we do a prioritization process, and then we take that to council and get their feedback on our prioritization process. We then go back and take another stab at it, and then it comes through the full budget deliberation process with formal recommendations of how we would allocate any one-time reserves. I will also mention that maintaining reserves beyond our city policy is very beneficial, and it is viewed by the financial people very fondly, we'll just say. This past week, as we're going out for bonds for the city's parks bonds, the $38.5 million in parks bonds, we went through a rating review process with Standard & Poor's. And one of the most important things that they dug into was the city's reserves. And they like to see reserves in excess of our policy. So I'm always, while we have a policy that is fiscally responsible, those really are the minimum reserves that we would want to, and the city maintains an AA+ bond rating, which is an excellent rating for a city of our size. And I am always conscious that I do not want to be the finance director that spends those reserves down to the point to reduce that bond rating. But that is so at the time though, but we do have some, I mean, we're in a solid reserve position at this point. So we have, there is some flexibility to fill some short-term gaps, but the challenge with filling a long-term sustainable gap when you're looking that it's systemic is that it just keeps getting bigger. And at some point, you're going to have to either boost your revenues way up high, or you're going to have to make big cuts in your spending. So that is where the levy lid lift helps to smooth that out. And maybe Christina, you might be able to say if that was too many words. I apologize.
No, that's great. And I would just say, another way to talk about this strategically is, in the good times, and you can think about this in your own life when the times are good for you and your family, we invest in those one-time things that we need to, new computers for staff, we put money towards the new maintenance facility that we know we're not going to get grants for, things like that. We use those good times, that extra revenue, and put those towards those investments. On the flip side, when times are bad and we have to tighten things, we don't do that. But our core services that are really necessary for our residents are untouched overall. We really haven't had the types of cuts in staff and services that other cities with not as conservative a policy have had to do. Issaquah laid off 20 people within 2 months of the COVID-19 recession starting. So that just goes to show you that there's other cities close by that do take a different approach to this. In terms of how it relates also to the levy, if we were budgeting all of those type of one-time investments, the levy rate would have to be higher, so this actually helps keep that levy rate lower, and we are still balancing our budget annually. So just a little bit of a different way to approach it than Sarah, in terms of a different kind of strategy.
And Lisa, I sent you the updated Q&A document.
Right, I'm reviewing it right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. Okay, and Robin, I'm going to go back to your question. And then I want to just see if there's other outstanding questions, particularly on, because our most important question is sort of the advice to the council, should we do this? And so I want to make sure that anyone who still needed more information has time to kind of have that discussion. Robin, please go ahead.
Thank you. I pulled my computer forward and unplugged it, so I apologize for that. I think that I completely understand about the reserves. As a library, King County Library System trustee, it was made clear to us every year that I was there, over 10 years, that the reserves have to cover, we had reserves to cover 6 months worth of expenses. And in the event that something happened, you have to cover your salaries, benefits, so on and so forth. So I don't have any problem with hanging on to the reserves, and I think it's a good idea. Something I am struggling with, it was kind of a two-sided thing. And one is the council setting priorities that they may not be able to afford, and then turning around and saying, go out and raise this money from the public to pay for these things we think we want. I think that's a perceptual issue that maybe that isn't how, maybe it's not what you intend, but it's kind of coming across as council wanting things that they can't really afford and then turning to us and saying, cough up the money. That's one thing. And the other thing that I'm still not clear on is how we what we should be able to do to boost our tax revenues, our property tax revenues, our sales tax revenues, all the other opportunities for tax revenues that increase our bottom line, I guess is the term. And one of the things that I still need to understand is that we have all these apartment buildings, condos and apartment buildings coming online, taking up small lots, building lots of residential units. We have invited this, we zoned for it, we asked for it, and we've had 10 years to anticipate the level of service necessary to provide for the hundreds or thousands of people we've invited to come live here. So there shouldn't, that's a timeline that we must have been thinking about all these years. Bringing thousands of people into town means that the level of service for parks, the level of service for everything, the quality of our streets, sidewalks, pedestrian, so on and so forth, everything has to increase based on bringing more people here. And surely we anticipated needing to raise the level of service in anticipation of building a larger population. And I'm still hearkening to the fact that our retail sales tax is not growing at a rate that our population is growing in terms of having goods and services available for people to buy in Shoreline. And I'm mostly concerned about this when we go out and try to sell this, how we're going to get it across to people that these things the city now wants and can't have with this gap, and that we're asking them to help us narrow the gap. So I don't know if you have a response to that, but it's, I support holding onto the reserves. I know that attempting to do this in November is probably, the timing is right. I'm willing to go out and ask for a levy lid lift, but I still need clarification on the dissonance that I'm feeling between some enthusiasm on the part of the city for all this new growth and the reaction on the part of the residents and citizens on what it means.
So Robin, there's a couple of things there. I'm going to take a few of them. One of them that I will just sort of put as a placeholder is you're not the only person that said, you know, it would be, we want to make sure that the city is looking at all revenues available. So there is desire to increase sales tax. Lincoln has said in the chat, I mean, there are a few levers to do that. And, you know, it's a tough, retail is a tough business to be in. So it can be harder to do that, but there is B&O tax, there are other taxes. The property tax, of course, is the thing that is capped at the 1%, which is why we're actually even talking about this levy lid lift. This is the one way that the city has to try to do more with property tax. But adding, you know, more buildings in sort of does add to the pool. So we'll definitely make a note in our recommendations, you know, that there was a kind of desire from many committee members to just make sure that the city is looking at all kind of revenue sources available, because we've heard that loud and clear from a couple people. You know, I think there's the planning for growth, and I'll let Sarah and Christina talk about this. And there's also changing regulations. So I think, you know, even in areas where there were sidewalks, you know, they weren't ADA compliant. So there's always sort of new things, I think, that both in terms of there's anticipating growth, and then there's the sort of new standards and sort of, you know, changing regulations and other things that the city's also trying to do. And so I think that sometimes comes into play. Council priorities, Christina, you can also perhaps speak a little bit more to that. I mean, I think, and maybe it's been misconstrued as sort of council is kind of coming up with these things, but of course it's coming from their constituents, right? So they are hearing from people in the community what their needs are and attempting to figure out then how as a city do we deliver on that. And that may mean some trade-offs in some cases where, you know, there's more emphasis perhaps on community policing. So where do we, you know, do something elsewhere? So I don't know, Christina or Sarah, if either of you want to provide a little bit more context on the sort of planning for growth piece of that question and the council priorities piece.
Sure, I can speak to the council priorities piece just to start and say that, yeah, the council is not coming up with these priorities on their own. I think, are very lucky to have a group of council members who's very connected, meets regularly with people out in the community, on people's streets, hearing from them about the specific issues that they're facing in their neighborhood, with their neighbors, the types of services that they like to see, how community policing is impacting them and their families. And so you have a group of people who have turned to staff and said, this is what we would like our priorities to be based on how we're engaging with our community. If you look over the years, and you can do this through on our website, we have council priorities over the years. You can see how some of them stay pretty static, but some of them have changed quite a bit. And certainly, just to use policing, since that is one of the recommendations for an emerging issue with the radar program and increasing that program, we're going from previous operational policy to have police in schools to no longer have police in schools, take them out of schools and invest in mental health professionals to ride along with officers. And I think that really reflects the desires of our community, the requests of our community, and to do policing differently. And so they're engaging in the same kind of conversations. And what I talk about with both the council members and my colleagues at City Hall is we're addressing some of the same issues that are being addressed nationally. And we don't have any answers necessarily either, but we're trying to hear from our community about the best direction to go. And our council is very committed to trying new things and hearing from the community about what they'd like to see. And so they're not coming up with these on their own. They are hearing from their community and then looking to staff to do research to help them analyze issues, to come up with different solutions, to take into consideration the costs. For example, with the radar program, again, as an emerging issue, repurposing money so that it actually is a pretty small amount of money that would be needed to fully fund this program, working together with other cities in North King County to have it done and not just working on our own. And there's several things that they're doing in order to recognize our place in Shoreline, the size of our city, and then what the residents would like and what we can actually do. So it's complicated, but they're not doing it, I would say, in a silo.
Oh, may I just respond to that? I appreciate that. And I think you made the perfect point. And that is if the priorities are based on what constituents are asking the council to do, that's the selling point. You're asking us to provide more of this, more of that, to provide you with better this, better that. And in order to do that, because of the levy lid, we have to ask you to help out. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's a better spin, if you will, then I think that makes me more comfortable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how I would frame this, is that that the things that the lift would finance are the things that the community is asking for. And that would be a good way to approach reaching out to the public and asking them to go for this. And I mean, each one of us has our own story about a community policing effort that we would like to see improved. So thank you for that, Christina.
And I got so involved in that, I forgot the second question.
The second
point around planning for growth, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take a stab, and then Christine, you might be able to fill in, because one of the challenges with planning for growth, number one, is that the timing of it, our plan and the growth plan is not something we have control over, exactly when it happens and how quickly it happens. It also doesn't, as you said, it doesn't necessarily generate revenues commensurate with the costs that are going to be required. But I would say for our levy lid lift, the biggest driver is, cost increases. I mean, we do have some staffing. If you looked at the staffing to sort of maintain levels, most of that staffing is around support. There is some front-facing staff, but a lot of it is a support staff needed where we've been able to keep up with things, but you add staff in other departments, and now it's taxing the support staff beyond their ability to absorb it. And I think we've done a lot of process improvements to try and address that. But at some point, you can't process improve when you don't have staff to continue to work on that. So I think planning, it isn't that we're not aware of it. And the other piece I'd say with that is there's no formula to say that for every new residence or every new housing unit, you're going to need an extra 0.25. There are metrics, you can compare by cities and such, but it's not as formulaic as we probably would like. And trust me, we've tried to go out and for certain functions say, have you done the study to tell you how many staff you should have to do that? But there's so many variables that I just haven't found an easy metric to say, this is how many staff you need to have. Policing is probably the one where there's maybe some of the best metrics that you can compare across communities. And even that is not perfect because we offer our police service differently than other communities do. So I don't know if you have anything else to add on to that, Christina.
And I'll just confirm that I know that the leadership team actually did speak to both Issaquah and to Kirkland around exactly these issues. Like these were communities that had experienced growth, and did they have a sense of like, well, what does that mean for staff? And that, it was very much an it depends answer that was given. And welcome, Joseph. We are just kind of talking through the general recommendations. So really tonight is an opportunity to kind of ask and answer questions so that as I shape up the recommendations, I can reflect kind of where the committee is at. So we've started with there was general support, I would say, for yes, the city should do this. Always concerns, as there is with any bond measure, about can everyone afford to? Will everyone want to do it? But we're just trying to figure out if there's other things people can add. The next thing I want to move to would be that sort of maintain versus expand question. And here again, I think we had sort of mixed opinions, and as has already been discussed, there was a little bit of confusion around we say maintain, but maintain also included adding staff, and so we can talk a little bit more about that as well. But before we move to the maintain expand, is there anything else that anyone wanted to mention on just the question of like should the city do this, go out for the levy lid lift? All right. Well, let's move to the maintain expand question. And the way that the question was focused was actually, should it maintain the current level of sort of city services? And this would be the sort of adding these positions that are needed to keep up with the expanding portfolio, but not adding new services. So here it was pretty split in that, we had 6 people said, yes, we should just let's just maintain what we have. Let's not add. 1 said, no, I think we should add. And then we had sort of 5 more don't knows. And again, I think some of the confusion was around what exactly does maintain versus expand mean? And there was some detail put in the Q&A as well to try to explain that maintaining with there is sometimes an erosion actually in the level of service over the life of a levy lid lift. And so even to maintain, we have to get back. That page, I think, where the maintain, sorry, I've got 2 documents open. I can get you the page number, Mary Ellen. It's actually on page 29, I believe.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And then in terms of, just to say, if it did expand, like what are the issues that people are interested in? There's also a range of issues there. And I would say that again also reflects council. I think if you ask council, radar versus enhanced recreation versus human services, you get as many opinions as there are often council members. So I think just sort of your deliberations are kind of in parallel with what will happen at council. But what other questions did people have around sort of, this maintain recommendation, or, or for someone who thought, well, I think we should expand, like, I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah, Lincoln.
I'll take a shot at it. I do think that the radar program is something that both council members, and certainly in listening to my neighbors, And you think about some of the issues with homelessness isn't necessarily the issue per se of somebody homeless. It's what is it that may prompt to, whether it's shoplifting, people wandering through people's backyards. I mean, all I'm saying is that I think if I were putting myself in the shoes of what will the public understand an enhancement on, that's one that will help solve a problem, several problems, and probably something people would say, yeah, that's top of mind, something that we need to address, as opposed to saying, let's put more money into creating more housing. And so I guess that's why I indicated that I thought that was one enhancement that I thought is both logical and sellable.
Thanks for that. Yes, I saw a hand. Susan.
Thanks, Allegra. In my mind, the radar program really goes hand in hand with that human services improvement and increase. Especially around here on my office on 192nd and Aurora, we've had a dramatic increase in crime and just unsafeness that I've frankly been quite surprised about. So I would be a proponent of having those two things go hand in hand.
Thanks for that. Mary Ellen.
I supported all of these enhancements, figuring at some point the council would back off, would set their own priorities. But I think all of them are understandable. I mean, I think about with the parks bond, levy passing, maintenance of parks, the trees, that ties in with the sidewalks piece. I think they're all really understandable. And they seem current, as in like, this is what our communities overall are struggling with. This is not, I mean, this is unique to Shoreline because we're talking about this, but we're seeing all of this and more in the headlines, and the headlines you look at every day. So like, what is our unique response to that? So that's why I would support that.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts on the services themselves, or just the sort of maintain, for those that felt like, let's just maintain, if you want to offer any perspectives on what your thinking was behind that. Yeah, Lisa.
I would just say, as someone who's lived in Shoreline now for over 30 years, I've been very pleased with the city. And when I first moved here, the city itself didn't actually exist. And people probably remember that a number of people, myself included, when we moved to Shoreline, it was because of the reputation of the public school system. And it's what brought so many of us here. And so there's always been, in my mind, this very symbiotic relationship between the city and the schools. And in fact, there are kind of bizarre things with, what the school system owns and what the city manages, and how you guys juggle those relationships. But I guess one of the things that I think about is what happened with the pool and the senior center when that went up to vote. And I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are about why the result was the result you got, and what your thinking is in terms of the strategy for this. I think there was actually a failure of communication about why the price tag was what the price tag was for the pool project. And so I guess, I understand, and I do want to fund adequate government and essential services. And I do want to maintain what we have currently. And I understand that with the projections for growth, if there's not this flexibility in terms of the levy lid lift, then you might not be able to maintain what we currently have. I understand that. I guess part of it goes back to some of what we're seeing happening around us for people who have lived in Shoreline, perhaps for, a decade or more. All of a sudden, we're seeing, like within my home, for example, there's probably at least 1,000 new apartment units that are going to be coming on board in the next couple of years. One close by Shorewood High School, and then one on Aurora, not, close by across the street from the Y, basically. And I think people are feeling a little bit like, wow, what's going on around here? I mean, there's so much happening. And then, of course, there's the giant development that's happening at 155th. So I think homeowners have concerns about, are we the only ones getting tapped to support what feels like a growth explosion in our community? Or how are the properties, you know, for apartments, or the properties for retail likewise taxed to support the city of Shoreline? So I would just encourage communication with the voters about that.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. That's good perspective, and a nice reflection on sort of your life in Shoreline. And I think that gets back to Christina's question about like, what is the city that you want to live in? And it's nice to hear that perspective. I want to ask the staff about communication, but Robin was waving at me frantically, and I think you may have a response to some of what Lisa said. So let me go to you first, Robin.
Thank you. Well, Lisa, I was co-chair of the bond for the pool, the parks, and it was a huge amount of money. The council, with the exception of our mayor, all voted to put it on the ballot. And there were several things. I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say communication, but several things worked against that. The senior center did not support it because they felt they were not getting enough space. The people who have been behind the YMCA, the board members, did not support it because they didn't want any competition with a pool. And there were other, and I have to say this, and that the swim community, i.e. the school district and our teams, our swim teams, were supportive, but not particularly active. So I put some of the responsibility on the campaign itself for not being able to overcome this resistance. And that was just a huge disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of money. When people reacted to it, I think many people reacted not to what we needed, but just reacted to the amount of money. And I think we're clear on that now, that it was just seemed like way too much. The loss to our community is huge. And this may be where the failure to communicate everything we needed came in. We have no community kitchen in this town. There's nowhere that any group, ethnic group, social group, can gather around a fully equipped commercial kitchen and have an event. And that was a huge selling point and something that I had lobbied for throughout the entire process, from conceptual design to the end, that we need to have a fully equipped commercial kitchen in this town, open to the public. And that was unfortunate. And so we lost that. We lost the pool. Our teams, our swim teams, are having to practice in Everett and at private pools. We lost this huge asset in terms of having a new swimming pool, which is not just a recreational pool for people to have fun. It's a learning experience for young people. And it's one of the most healthy opportunities for the aging and the disabled to recreate and enjoy each other's company. So the loss of that, the failure, is immense. And the opportunity to get a facility like that again is almost impossible now. The next iteration, which may be a pool involving other cities, would be a good thing, but it won't be in Shoreline, and it won't be a complete facility with a kitchen, senior facilities, and all the other things we need in terms of a community asset. So that's the reason that I am speaking up about how we're going to sell this thing, is because the selling points are everything. And you all may not have gathered this yet, but in my experience with committees like this, the city is going to turn to us to go out there and sell this thing. And so we have to be 100% behind it, and we have to have our talking points right on point, and to be able to communicate, as you say, what the needs are and why people need to vote yes. So that's my take on what went on. The city staff may have a little more to offer, but in terms of the campaign, it was a risk, and we thought it was a risk willing to take. But there were the lack of support by some organizations that could have really helped push it over, I think was a turning point.
Thanks for that context, Robin. That's really helpful. I see, Joseph, you had a hand up. I'm going to reference a comment in the chat, and I've still pinned a few things that Sarah or Christina may want to speak to. So please go ahead, Joseph. Oh, you know, Joseph, we can't hear you, or I can't hear you. I don't know about others. No. Try now. No.
Maybe on your mute, there's that little carrot, I call it a carrot, the up, and maybe pick a different input.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, we can.
Weird.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for bearing with me there, and apologize for being late. It's just kind of one of those days. You know, I think it's important to understand the levy lift and all the benefits that would be available for the city. Unfortunately, we don't have a blank checkbook, right? So we have to like really pick and choose what we want our city to ultimately look like, right? And so I think it's generally a good idea to try to go out and seek a levy lift, but to kind of Lisa's point, we really need to be mindful of, you know, the voters are saying yes to a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, how many times do you actually go back to the voters and say, hey, we want you to ultimately support this very important work, without necessarily messaging like Robin was talking about, and really understanding like these are the whys, right? Because ultimately we've had a lot of wins in the economy the last 5 to 7 years. And, you know, now there appears to be some headwinds, right? And so whenever this measure actually goes out, people's mindset about kind of their understanding of maybe their personal finances might be completely different than what we were talking about 6 months ago. So I think it's just really important to understand that, hey, this is real. And I think I came into the conversation about how council make decisions and if it's in a silo or not, or, you know, and so it's reassuring to hear that it's not in a silo, but really understanding how we grow this city for the next 15 or 20 years, and then what that impact's going to be, right? Because these decisions in the levy lift will impact that growth potentially, right? And so it's a hard issue. I don't think it's a perfect question or answer to the questions, but we can't have it all. You know, we can't have a pool. We can't have, you know, all these services. We certainly need to be mindful of economic development and growing to get additional tax revenue, sales tax revenue. It was interesting to see that we have more residents than the city of Linwood, but their sales tax revenue is obviously so much higher than ours. And so that was shocking to me, because I just thought the Linwood was such a bigger city, right? So I think this work has been important. I've actually learned a lot. Hopefully I've contributed a little bit as well, but it's just messaging as well.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. You're primed to be on council, because this is exactly the stuff that they wrestle with. I mean, they are hard choices, and And I think, I would say that just again, working with the council, they are very mindful of that context of, and very sensitive to how people are feeling right now. And there's, a lot of that in the newspapers every day around sort of inflation and gas prices and all of these things. And like you say, saying yes to things, right? This is kind of how we fund things in this state. And people get asked a lot. So appreciate those comments. There was a comment, just if anyone hasn't seen it, Lincoln just explaining that the way development comes online and the fact that there is a multifamily tax exemption does mean that sometimes these property tax growth for the city is sort of somewhat delayed. So just wanted to call attention there. And then Linda, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm very appreciative this evening of this conversation. I was one of those that on the survey that had answered, I don't know as well. But I know that Sarah and Christina and whoever else has seen my comments, I had a lot to say in terms of why I was feeling, why I was answering, I don't know. But I will say, in the spirit of transparency, at the very beginning of my survey response, I said I am leaning towards a yes, as I recognize that the city has been utilizing all 7 of its strategies and that property taxes have presented a significant strategy and source of revenue. But I had a number of questions, and it's all relating to what we've discussed so far in this first hour. And I even had a conversation with Christina on the phone earlier today as well. In fact, I submitted 5 of the 9 questions that are on the updated Q&A that we all received. And so I guess I understand what Lisa, and I empathize with what Joseph has shared and Robin, and I'm feeling also that when we had the last round of election that was back on February 8th, right? And so we had 2 school replacement levies approved. We had the parks proposition approved. And that was just 3 months ago? And a lot has happened in 3 months, right? And a lot going on internationally. And my son attends high school. He's attended Shoreline schools all his life. We've been living in Shoreline since 1995, my husband and I. And so I relate a lot to what Lisa has shared in terms of the wonderful things that our community has done and what in the education system here. And that's why we have continued to stay here. All to say that, you probably saw my comment in the chat there that I think it'll be really ultra important to position this levy lid lift in a way where your average voter is going to get it. I mean, all of us have had this insight already from just participating in this committee, right? I have learned so much that I had no idea prior to when we all started. In fact, I was telling Christina earlier that I will never look at a pothole the same way as I now do. And I was just off of 195th and 8th Avenue Northwest the other day, and Christina's already heard this, but I saw a City of Shoreline truck out there and a gentleman, one of your workers, scrubbing a speed limit sign or maybe a crosswalk sign. I'm like, I have never seen that. I have never seen anybody do that. And so that's one of the things that I have taken for granted, but someone, God bless him, is doing that and being paid for it. And so, I value a lot of what the services that we're all talking about here. And but at the same time, I worry about the families next door. I worry about the people who are wanting to live in Shoreline, but they can't, they're being priced out, right? And on social media, I see comments from people who are feeling like they need to look elsewhere outside of Shoreline, maybe further north, further south, wherever, to get into their first home. And so it's an unfortunate situation. Maybe, that's just the ebbs and flows of the economy that, challenge us, and we just have to be in a very challenging place right now. But anyhow, thank you for listening to my dialogue. I'm just kind of rambling right now. I'm the one that has to leave at 7:45, but I just wanted to say thank you and appreciate this forum. And I have a question, one more question. And is the city planning on having community forums or maybe town halls as we move closer to November, a time for where people other than us, can ask questions publicly?
Yes, so we did that with the park bond. So if this were to go onto the ballot, the city provides factual presentations explaining what is on the ballot, but also the process leading up to it and why we're there. So for example, with the park bond, it went into the whole planning process of the parks, recreation, and open space planning, who participated in that, what kind of feedback we got, and so on and so forth, the council process. So yes, that would be part of this if council places this on the ballot.
And I just want to share, as the report author, people sharing their thoughts and sort of like your context is really helpful, because that is sort of what I'm trying to communicate in the report. As I mentioned, it's a pretty high level recommendation. The council was not expecting you to come back and be like, it should be a 147, you should spend it on these 3 things. Like, that's the answer. But they're trying to understand, like, you as members of the community, kind of where are you at? So appreciate that. And I am taking notes. Mary Ellen, I have you next.
I just want to tag on to Linda, your comments and all of them about communicating. I don't want to raise our taxes. I mean, but I think we have a responsibility as a committee, given what we know, to say to the city, to city residents, this is what it costs. And this is the one vehicle we have to be able to fund it. Now, people may, we may not prevail, but I think to not put it out in a way that says, we've looked, that these are the things that we all value. This is what it costs, and let people make that decision. I mean, it's not going to get any easier. It will certainly not get easier, presumably next year. So I think my brain just skipped a point that I was trying to make. But I do think it's our responsibility to take a look at this and figure out how to communicate with people. That this, none of us particularly like it, but you should know, if you live here, here's how these things get funded.
Yeah.
You may not like the funding mechanism, but this is what we've got.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. And I think your kind of, it won't get any easier message relates a little bit to Lincoln's point in some ways, which was kind of a deferred maintenance message as well, right? That you can, by not doing things, the gap to get back to where you were then becomes quite challenging. And the ask becomes bigger potentially.
If I could make a comment to that. Certainly it won't get any easier, right? And no one wants to pay more than their fair share of taxes, right? And we need to grow the city and we need to grow our resources. But I think in messaging the levy lift, it might be nice if council or the city started to talk about, what are the upticks in potential other funding sources?
Yeah.
Right. And so, my spouse tends to walk a lot in the city. She messaged me yesterday and said, oh my gosh, Menchie's is out of business. Right. Yeah. And so you're like, whoa, we're losing small business here at a major hub on the Aurora corridor. Like, why? Like, you know what I'm saying? And so when we were looking at COVID-19 response, like, I have a myriad of questions like, hey, did they reach out for help? What's the story? So businesses are going to come and go, but certainly how are we business friendly from a small business standpoint? What's coming online? What can the residents be really, excited about? I'm actually tired of going to Edmonds for a good meal, right? Or just like, heading for happy hour. I want to be able to do that right here in our city. And that might be 2, 3, 5, 7 years away, but we want to know about it.
That's a great point, Joseph, and ties to your earlier point too, just around economic development. And so it's sort of like a both and, right? It's like but we are doing other things, right? And we have these, this is sort of what it costs and what we have to fund it. And here's what else we're doing. So yeah, these are great comments. Other questions? And also I wanted to give Sarah, Christina, is there anything you've heard you wanted to respond to or follow up on from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say just briefly, the quote unquote failed pool parks measure. I think, a different perspective from staff is, our job is to follow a planning process. That process started with the PROS plan, the Parks Recreation Open Space plan in around 2017, lots of community input, lots of community, sessions for feedback with different sort of stakeholder groups who had, interest in trees versus light rail versus older adult recreation, just all sorts of folks coming to the table. It ended up with the park board making a recommendation, which then went to council and ended up with a parks and a pool, community center and pool measure with some park improvements that didn't pass. But I think from staff's point of view, it was successful in that was what the community feedback was that we had and went through the process. And so to get to that point and then get community feedback that once they realized the cost of what they were asking for, they were said, no, thank you. It was just too much from everyone who participated in answering that question, right? That's what the election was. So I think that is a good feedback point in terms of, who participated, how did they vote and things like that. But from the city perspective, we did go through a process that listened to the community and ended up with something on the ballot, and that is our job. So, we expect to have some that pass and some that don't, and they all provide us feedback. And Joseph, I should just have you and our economic development manager who you met through this process, Nate, sit down and talk, because he's one of the most enthusiastic people about innovative ways to bring people to Shoreline. And he could share so much with you about the ways that we really supported small businesses. And I will say Menchie's wasn't one of them, because we really didn't support the franchises or other businesses that could get a helping hand from their corporate brethren. But I think there's a lot of things that we're trying to do, and eating locally is, socializing locally. Those are the types of things that we know are still probably totally a few years out, but we're making efforts in that direction. And I think you could have a lot of fun speaking with him. Yeah. Or anyone else for that matter.
And I would also just want to tag on to Lincoln's comment about the delayed economic benefit of the development. And I think that is very true when it comes to retail activity, right? The retail activity will show up after, once the residents, there's more density, then that is what will then attract those higher end retail restaurants, establishments. So unfortunately, there's not many other ways to woo them in other than making sure that they have a place to go, which I think council is, so it's regulations, and then making it, as attractive as possible, but they need their clientele and their numbers. And so, and Nate is always out there reaching. So I do believe that there is, in the Shoreline Place development, one of the first things will be some eateries. And, if you haven't been to the Ridgecrest Public House lately, and their sister or brother restaurant, that I'm drawing a blank on the name, but I just love it.
The Drumlin, yes.
The Drumlin, they have great Brussels sprouts if you're a Brussels sprout eater. So good. And then of course down the Blackbird down. And so if you're looking for some place that's still local and sort of nice, I give those a try if you haven't tried them yet.
Thanks. So another question that I want to just explore with the group while we're all together, and again, I'll sort of try to pull everything together in a summary that we'll discuss at our last meeting, was again around this rate question. So as I mentioned, some people gave very specific answers. Other people were like, I'm not sure, but there were sort of parameters, if you will, or maybe even trade-offs is the way to think about it, because sometimes they work in opposition that you shared. So I want to sort of share what I've heard so far and see if there's other things that you would sort of say to council, like when you're thinking about the rate, keep this in mind, right? So I mentioned the concerns about the tax burden for people who either have low or fixed incomes. That was one, sort of ability to pay. Voter fatigue, just given, you just had the schools and parks levies, and that's just your levies, and you all participate in King County levies. And then the request to look at all revenue sources and just continue to think about how do we grow the ones that aren't capped, like sales tax, B&O, other things. And then on the other side was, I would say there was also a desire expressed to really like get in front of issues and make sure that we have strong infrastructure and we have the infrastructure in place to support growth. So what else would others add to, how do you think about sort of the rate question? Joseph, I see you.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about it in terms of like, okay, this is the start of the levy lid lift. And then at the end of the levy lid lift, potentially where would we be at from a property tax increase? Is that 17% for residents, 25%, potentially cumulative, right? And if so, kind of what's the benefit? Like what did the voters get? And so I was just really interested to see, I think it's unknown, maybe those numbers would come out in June, what the CPI-U, I believe, is going to come in at, because if it's anything dealing with what the inflation numbers have been early this year and what they continue to be, they're probably going to come north of 5%, right? 4 to 5%, we would say. And so if we're setting the percentage and it's going to be 4.5%, we're already starting at 5%, and then it's going to grow from there. So I think council maybe should think about, cumulative, where do we need to be to hit our numbers, and then kind of work backwards from there.
Great, thanks for that. I don't know, Sarah or Christine, if there's anything you wanted to, we did talk last time that there is, of course, always the flexibility. So that when it is tied to CPI-U, that's the ceiling, not the floor. So there could be a choice to do less, but I hear you saying like, look out over the life and try to understand what that might be. Sarah, I'll go to you and then I'll go to Jim.
Yeah, and Joseph, that I think is what our model, what we try to do is we use, in Christie, I'm going to goof up this term, but it's a seek and find tool in Excel.
Goal seek. It's goal seek.
Goal seek. Thank you. And so it really is looking at the end. If this is our goal, what would it take at the beginning to reach that goal? Unfortunately, that's all based upon a lot of assumptions, and those, the CPI increases over that period, and then that impact that it'll have on residents based upon the what the assessed valuations will be. So we're waiting for as good of information as we can get on those before we update. It's a lot of work to update the model, and we have exactly one budget analyst. It's Christy. And so we can't do that over and over again with a bunch. We've been trying to model as many assumptions as we can for you, but to do the full update, we'll wait. But that is just to assure you, as we look at it, that's what we do, is look at the end and then work backwards.
Great, thank you for that. Jim, I was going to go over to you next.
Thanks, Sarah. I think you probably kind of answered my question. It goes back to Joseph's comment as well, that unfortunately assessed values often trail market values. And markets, the real estate market's been on a tear. We may start to see some cooling. The assessed values are still going to be catching up. We're going to add a levy lift to the property taxes, and oh, by the way, the values now have gone down potentially. We're behind a little bit, unfortunately.
Robin.
We haven't discussed a rate. I mean, we were given the choices of the $1.27, $1.38, $1.54, so on and so forth. Are we going to talk about, did the survey suggest that we have a consensus on a rate?
No, I would say not, which is sort of why I'm going to the kind of how would you suggest that council approach the issue? Because we actually had we had as high as 158 and as low as sort of 1.2, I think it was. And some in the kind of, can we try to keep it the same area? But I would say we were like widely divergent in terms of what the rate was sort of picked. And I don't think, again, that the council is looking for this group to say it's 142, like that's the answer. Which is why I'm trying to get a sense of like, how would, if you were setting the rate, how would you approach it? What would be your principles?
Well, I wouldn't go up in the 1.5s.
Okay.
I wouldn't recommend that to anybody.
Yeah, and I mean, I know from some early council conversations that I don't think they're headed there for all the reasons we've discussed, right? I mean, they're very aware of all of these same things. Christina or Sarah, is there anything else on the kind of the rate conversation we should try to explore with this group? Oh, John has a hand up, so let me go there. Oh, but I need you to come off mute, John. And Mary Ellen, I think your point is right on that. Whatever the rate is, you have to be able to tell people what they're buying and what they get for that. So excellent point. All right, go ahead, John.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think that very important consideration is phasing on this. I don't think residents and taxpayers would be interested in a huge jump at this time. So I think that however it is phased in, it should be based on what their current rate is, marginal steps upward as necessary, but not a huge leap in the overall tax hit at this time.
That's great. Thank you. I saw a number of nodding heads as you were saying that as well. Yeah, Lincoln.
I'm just also going to give you, starting out by, hey, if you don't pass this, this is, the doom and gloom. It scares the hell out of people and usually turns people off.
Yeah.
So I would just echo what Mary Ellen says. Start out from the assumption that people want to maintain this and tell them what else we get.
Yes.
So that, and that's why I thought the radar program was an ideal example of this is an enhancement that should be much more effective across a number of the objectives we've heard from voters you want us to achieve. To some degree, her comment about the human resources and the other things all fit right into that, which is, from all of what you've told us are emerging issues and concerns, this is a cost-effective way to address those instead of starting from, hey, the sky is falling and inflation is killing us and we won't be able to keep up.
Yeah, excellent point. I think you're right that the fear-based argument rarely wins the day. And in many cases, depending on the messenger, is a real turnoff. Agreed. Sarah?
Can I ask a clarifying question of John's point? Because there is one way we could do it the way that you've suggested, which is sort of keep the rate low and then increase it over time. And that, because the way the law works, it handcuffs us a little bit in that we get to reset the rate one time at the very beginning. And then from there, we either tie increases to some index, we've used CPIU in the past, or we can state specific increases. So to do what you're talking about, I would see what we have to do would be say, well, the rate in the first year is going to be, $1.27 $1.13, because that was what it was this year. And then we're going to allow up to a 5% or up to a 8% increase based upon what we need in the future years. And my sense for that is that people will go, why 5% or why 8%? That it was a harder message, because everybody, I think, understands inflation and tying to CPIU. But if I'm wrong, I would appreciate other thoughts on that.
John, do you want to, I just want to see if you wanted to respond just or clarify, and then I'll go to Lincoln.
It would just appear to me that if you have the flexibility based on increasing the rate by CPI, people will understand that. That's fairly commonly used. So I think if you're comfortable with that, and you can foresee in your model that it satisfies what your anticipated or balancing your budget as you look forward, I think it would be reasonable. Selling on a CPI increase, which shouldn't be that difficult.
Yeah, and I think John, I just want to check. I heard in your remarks that you were really about the reset, was to not to do the reset really as the leap, but to consider where we are now. You maybe start a little bit more, but just be mindful of like not making it sort of a price shock. But I interpreted that as.
That's more or less my.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Lincoln?
You know, my suspicion is a lot of voters are much like this committee, not understanding the policy around surpluses, right?
Yeah.
When you receive a surplus, what is it? What is the first priority? When and where is tax relief, if you will, under consideration? If the city all of a sudden, and let me just use my example about the multifamily, at some point, right, those either tax exemptions roll off, or the economic activity of having 1,000 more people or 2,000 more people starts to impact. And so then you have a decision. Have we, just incrementally in our mindset, will we keep raising the level of service because we've got more revenue? Or do you start to sort of say, no, we're making a conscious choice either to build a bigger reserve or to start to scale back from what we statutorily are allowed to do to a less than CPI increase. And I think that's all down to the nuances of how you communicate, how the council uses its one-time surpluses rather than just counting on those to backfill these, projected shortfalls in future years. Because I think it's a really confusing thing for people to understand, and it requires a consistent message, that you are trying to make good fiscal sense. And Christina, your point about bond ratings, people may not know it, but the difference between a AA rating and a B rating is huge in both your ability to borrow and the cost of the borrowing. And, that stuff most voters wouldn't have a clue about, but it's really important to try and maintain.
Yeah, great point. I have a couple of notes on some of the things we've heard about communicating tonight. One is the sort of like, why do we need this? What do you get for it? What else is the city doing to either raise revenues or control expenses? So, how else is the city being responsible? And then, if you do have surplus funds or there's a one-time, influx, like what's the city's sort of process for figuring out where those go? And would it ever be to something like tax relief? Anything else anybody would, and don't use a fear-based approach was another sort of general principle on the messaging. Again, make it about the opportunity and that quality of life that many of you have said you really enjoy. So Lisa, I see your hand, and then Robin.
I think it's been really good to see how many opportunities for community input Shoreline offers. This is obviously one of them as well. And I think if there's a way to communicate the sensitivity to tying the city's goals as it moves forward to the residents' satisfaction surveys and what has been identified, so the city demonstrates not only that it's fiscally responsible, but that it's sensitive to building the type of community that the residents want.
Yeah, great thought. And my sense is that I think they try to do that. And I think communicating more around how that happens is a great idea. Robin.
I wanted to just remind ourselves, it is true, as with the parks bond, we replace something. With this one, we have a levy lid in place, and so people have voted for levy lids over the last 25 years. Every 6 years, we have voted for this in favor of it. So we are reminding people that this is what we do every 6 years, and that it's an increase over the last 6 years, but it's not a exactly new tax.
Mhm,
It's a continuation of something we've been doing.
mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think what Lisa just said and what Mary Ellen has said, I mean, we're coming up with a very credible, positive message
Yeah.
of why we need to do this, that it's how we basically give you what you want.
Yeah. Well said. Right. Well, let me just open it up at this point for, questions or comments on the questions, or if there was anything in Q&A or just outstanding questions people had for staff before, I try to summarize things in a report, and that's what we'll focus our discussion on next time. Yeah, John.
We also talked a lot about possible increases due to CPI stuff. Have you reflected on recession conditions and what might happen?
John, we don't like the R word.
Oh, I know we don't.
As we update the forecast, that will be exactly part of our discussion, of looking at what the forecasters are anticipating. The economists, we lose a Puget Sound economic forecasters. We've also been talking to Seattle, who has a whole team that focus on this, and to see what their prognostications that's the word, anyway, are for the future. What's the likelihood that this is a short-term? Thus far, Puget Sound economic forecasters has indicated their perception is that this is a short-term issue and not that we're not heading into recession. That could change as we get their June update, but that is why we do the forecast and we think about them. What are our fallback positions? But we won't start making reductions. What we do, actually, even going into the budget process, is we do anticipate, well, what would we do if the levy lid lift doesn't pass?
Mhm.
We have to think about that.
Yeah.
And that won't be incorporated into our budget for 2023. We will prepare the budget as if it was passing. We'll prepare the budget based upon what Puget Sound economic forecasters think the next 10 years is going to look like. And if that includes a recession, our reactions will be included in that budget process. So I would say, it's in our minds, but we haven't started sharpening our pencils yet.
Question.
Would you remind us about the schedule when we're done and you take your report to council? What's the sequence for their deciding to put it on the ballot?
I can do a very rough draft and follow up with an email, Robin, or would you rather me not tell you wrong things and I can just send it later? I mean, high level is we'll be going to council in June with both this report and some staff recommendations. We still have a lot of work to do before then, but by middle of July, we're looking to have the first draft, them look at the first draft of the ordinance, where they can decide whether or not to that they're giving staff direction to put the levy lid lift on the ballot. And they'll need to see that one more time before the primary, because we'll need to have to King County elections by the date of the August primary, usually the second Tuesday or the first Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, of August. Councils, if they want to put this on the November ballot. So it comes pretty quickly, I guess, is what the long and short of it is after our last meeting together. So tomorrow, my day is spent working on the first draft of the shell anyway, the framework of the staff report to council, without the part with your recommendation yet. So we're starting to work on it. Oh, thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Joseph. Jim, I saw you go off mute.
Let me cut to the chase a little bit. We've got through this process. We have 9 yeses, 0 no's, and 3 abstentions who are wavering and probably leaning a little towards the yes column. We're talking about whether or not we're going to do this. Christina, is it fair to say that the council will in fact be moving this along, and the question is going to be what it'll look like in terms of the rate and how it's sold, not whether or not it's going to happen?
I would say that they were probably in the same kind of boat where they were leaning heavily towards this when they met in early March for their annual retreat. That said, I think that they talked about this for about 2 hours, and they haven't had staff do Sarah presented that day with Rick. And so that was kind of their first opportunity to look at what it could include. But they really are waiting till this next meeting in June to hear from you all, and to hear more from staff. We're going to hopefully have at least preliminary information where Christy is going to be working on updating the budget, the 10-year sustainability model. So we're going to hopefully have enough information whether they can at least tell us whether or not they want us to come back with an ordinance. I think if nothing else, they'll tell us to come back with an ordinance because they may not have everything they need to make a decision. And so it'll give them more time, give staff more time, give us another opportunity to update the model with new information that we'll get in July. I mean, so it really comes right down to it. I would invite you all to share public comment during those meetings, as well as the rest of the public. I used to work in the Seattle area and am much more familiar with a lot more public involved in the budget process with many more public comments. So I'd encourage you all to participate in that process in any way that you see fit. But yeah, so I'm sorry that's not like a direct absolute answer, Jim. I appreciate your question. I think I'd be surprised if they didn't, but also I don't think that they're there in a decision yet.
I can add, I pulled up the agenda planner so I can.
Oh, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, no worries. So we will take the discussion of this report and staff recommendations to council on June 13th. We anticipate that we would take back the ordinance for them to, assuming that they direct us to, that we bring back the ordinance to them on June 27th. So pretty quick. And then they're scheduled then to take action on that ordinance to place the measure on the ballot on July 18th, which sets us up because the other action council then has to do is to appoint a pro and a con committee, and that's scheduled for July 25th. So I believe that Eric does his advertising as soon as council sort of gives direction after that conversation on the 27th. That he begins advertising for the pro and con committee because it's a very tight timeline. You're muted, Christine.
Sorry, yes. July 18th, you said, for possible action on the ordinance? Okay, yep. And then July
25th for the appointment of the pro and con committee.
That's really interesting. I had no idea it goes across the council table so many times.
Yes.
Welcome to the life of staff.
Well, and
Like,
I
hello,
think to
I'm
your
here
point,
again.
I think Christina's right. And Jim, I think in a way, like council are probably doing what you're doing and talking to anybody who will listen right now to sort of get a sense of like, where are they on this issue? Because they do have to make a decision relatively quickly.
They're also talking to the city manager. They have regular one-on-ones. So they do have some interaction between meetings, for example, and certainly they know that this is happening. But, you know, we don't go back after each of these meetings and brief the city manager or council members. I mean, really, this process is not done yet. And so they really are waiting for the report to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. And actually, to Jim's opening remark that there were some people who were sort of still unknown. Again, we don't have to we're going to talk about general consensus and sort of what the range of thoughts were. But if anyone's sort of shifted opinions or has like new thoughts or moved from a I don't know to a yes, definitely feel free to share that with Christina, and I can try to reflect that also in the next draft. Yes, Lisa, and then Robin.
Just curious if the planned retirement of the Shoreline city manager is going to have any impact on the process for you guys?
No. What's really wonderful, this is the second time I'm answering this question today, as the wheels of government move anyway, and we have a fantastic leadership team. Sarah's on that. We have a great assistant city manager, and we have a council that trusts staff. And so the wheels will turn and move forward, and we will go through this process with or without Debbie Terry, until November 2nd. And they will be also going through a process to recruit a new city manager during this time as well. So it'll be happening simultaneously.
Robin.
Well, I know that nothing's going to change about Zoom meetings between now and several months. But I'm wondering, given the schedule and given what may be expected of us in the future, whether it would be possible for us to meet in person, not on city time, not like this, but I would volunteer to have the committee come for tea, coffee, beer, wine at my house after we're done. I just think that we need to see each other in person. And I really would love to get us together offline, or we could meet at one of these restaurants where we need to be spending some money.
Right.
And just get introduced so that we may, in my previous experience, the minute the council starts talking about this, we can show up, express our support, express how knowledgeable we are about the topic, and hope that we're not asked questions we don't know the answer to. But I think that in the past, that's what has happened. There has been a sort of natural transition from this committee's work to supporting the campaign itself. And I just think after May 19th, we need to see each other in person. I don't know how the rest of you feel about that, but I feel pretty strongly about it.
Yeah, I saw a couple nodding heads and a thumbs up.
I'll be there. I'll be there.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think all
yeah.
things in moderation. We, for a number of years, used to keep our sailboat at Shoreline, and Shoreline would come out with this annual rate increase, and they would do CPI +4. I have no problem with CPI. Their costs go up, that's reasonable. But why CPI +4 always seemed arbitrary. And so when we go through this process, I don't have any problem supporting city government and maintaining its operations. So all things in moderation. I would say yes, I would vote for this levy lift, but I'm going to be toward the lower end of the range. Because again, the 150 is extravagant.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. All right. Any final questions, comments? We don't need to be like on right until till 8 if there's not more discussion to be had. And I just want to check as well if staff, there's anything that you want to follow up with tonight. As we mentioned, the next steps are I'm going to try to pull this together into a report and reflect some of the discussion that we've had, and you'll get that ahead of our next meeting where we'll discuss it more.
I don't have any more questions, but I would like to first thank every single one of you. You have been fabulous and engaged. And I wish we had many, many more residents that were willing to dedicate so much time and effort to learning how we operate. So I hope that I have a few more people who might come to budget public hearings, because there's very rarely anybody there. I also don't want to, and I know we'll have one more meeting, but I do want to just acknowledge, because I think that the number crunching is through. I want to acknowledge Christy and how much work she's done with Rick leaving. And she has been crunching and responding to questions, and then Christina, who stepped in. So anyway, thank you all so much.
Yeah.
Sarah, I think the same thing goes from the committee, that you're willing, you and Christy are willing to spend evenings letting us grill you. So thank you. Been gracious.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would just like to also just offer, if I haven't, or even if I have already spent time with you in a one-on-one, please feel free to give me a call. That's what I'm here to help go through the Q&A. I'm here to answer more questions. I'm here to talk about how we run. I am a total government nerd and really love doing that. Like, I really want people to understand how this all works more. So if I get overexcited and you're trying to get off the phone with me, I apologize. I'll try to read the room, but really give me a call, send me an email, and I will certainly make as much time as we're able to help get you to a point where you have a better understanding of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Lisa.
I would just suggest, and maybe it was just me as opposed to other people participating in the committee, but I would be happier if I had known at what points the committee members would have opportunities to have discussion exchanges, as opposed to just having presentations that all seemed to be very enthusiastic about the levy lid lift without discussion amongst ourselves about questions as we were going along in the process.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Lisa. And we've had some discussion too as a kind of a staff team on, I think we were assured that presentations would be quite brief. And this was our first time on the video format running these types of meetings. And our time expanded, and each time I was like, there's really not time for questions. And I think that was probably a miss. So I acknowledge that and appreciate you raising that. And I think we would, knowing what we know now, we would probably do that a little differently, particularly in the video format when you probably come off a day of video calls, possibly with other presentations. All right, well, I'm gonna move to adjourn us now. Again, I just want to express my thanks to all the committee members, to the staff. It has been very seamless. I mean, when I heard Rick was leaving, I was like, what are we going to do? And I think it's still a loss, obviously, but this group has just, very seamlessly picked up and provided a ton of information and been responsive to you all, and clearly and very responsive to me. So great appreciation for everyone on the call. And we will see you on May 19th, and you'll get a draft of the report and the recommendations before then. All right. Have a good evening, everyone.